and Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward. In this new case of OCG, Skye, I want to get into the word facilitate because we've heard it from the Supreme Court, and I talked to some folks in the administration who said they were happy that they just said the word facilitate because it gave them a gray area. No one knew what the hell it meant. But this judge says, quote, "The court notes that facilitate in this context should carry less baggage than in several other notable cases. OCG is not held by any foreign government. Defendants have declined to make any argument that facilitating his return would be costly, burdensome, or otherwise impede the government's objectives. The court anticipates that defendants will take at least the same level of action as is routine to return lawfully removed aliens." It seems like he's learned his lesson from some of these other cases where the administration kind of waffled on the word facilitate, finally.
Yep, the administration keeps trying to double down on what Justice Jackson has called catch me if you can justice. And you see the judges, though, being very strong, that this is not what we do in the United States. You see them becoming more savvy to the administration's tricks. And I think that as concerned as we are for all of the people, and by the way, there are so many who have been removed without process in many instances. The good piece of this is that the judges are not having it. And I think you're going to continue to see that build over the next few weeks.
It is just unfathomable how many men and women who are in America legally have been deported by the Trump administration. It's a level of sloppiness and disregard for human rights and the Constitution that it's unimaginable in American history. Can you talk about how you went through and you documented all of the men and women who were illegally taken from America, even though they were here under the law?
Right. So the Trump administration expelled, really rendered these individuals from Venezuela to El Salvador to a prison. They are imprisoning them at our expense. Again, no charges, no trials, not even a hearing before their removal. We went through and we documented at least 50 cases. 50 out of the 250 who were sent, 50 cases of people who came legally to the United States. They never violated any immigration law. And the whole premise of the administration's argument here is people came here illegally, so they have no due process. They have no rights whatsoever under the Constitution. These people came legally at the invitation of our government. They were detained and then ultimately expelled without a hearing, without due process. And that's the concern here for everyone who whether you are a U.S. citizen, whether you're a legal permanent resident, whether you're someone else who's come here legally. This is what the administration's advertisement to the world of what America does to people who come to our country. We don't give you any rights. And that should be not only scare immigrants who are coming here, but Americans who are traveling abroad, because we will have no right to object when a country does that to a U.S. citizen traveling abroad to an authoritarian country who does these kind of things.
And your study is not the only one that has found this, right? Over and over and over again, reporters, think tanks like yours, other organizations, random people have looked through these lists and found it. So it's not just like you guys saying this.
And Skye, let's keep the conversation talking on U.S. citizens. Yes. And I was put up this NBC News headline: U.S. citizen with real ID handcuffed and held in immigration raid before being released. I'm quoting here: apparently a real ID is not valid anymore. He has a real ID, his cousin Shayla Venegas said. We all made sure we have the real ID and went through the protocols the administration is asking for. He has his real ID, and then they see him, and I guess because his English isn't fluent and or because he's brown, it's fake. It's not real. And I read that also because, I was at a memorial service yesterday in Chicago and was told by a friend that the son of a friend of theirs, American citizen, snatched up by immigration. They couldn't find him. They have found him. But now they're having conversations about whether they should carry passports with them to prove their citizenship. I mean, and I bring this up because, Trump ran on deporting violent, illegal, quote unquote, illegals. And now you have law-abiding, American citizens fearing that they could get snatched up, especially if they're black or brown.
And it was never about immigration policy, and that's what we're seeing. Because if it was, you would actually see the president using lawful processes, which he's not interested in. We have said that every single American should be concerned about these cases, and we've been saying that at Democracy Forward for some time as we've litigated these cases in the courts, because we know if it can happen to Mr. Garcia, if it can happen to people on planes where judges tell you to turn the planes around and the administration gleefully, the judge found did not, it can happen to any of us. And that's really what due process is. And it seems that this administration is just inconvenienced by the rights that everyone in this country has. They are inconvenienced by the Constitution. It is clear that their strategy is being run out of the White House by people like Stephen Miller, who were not even lawyers, who appear to, even yesterday in his tweets, be completely inconvenienced and upset that the American people have a Constitution that entitles them to rights and that it is judges' jobs to enforce those rights.
Well, the president himself has said we can't possibly give due process to all these people.
Right.
That is, well, sir, the Constitution says persons. It does not say citizens will have the right.
Well, and that is actually what it means to live in America, and that what it means is what it means to be an American. And for all of the rhetoric out of the White House about how people are a threat to our way of life, it is this that's a threat to the American way of life. It is due process that separates this country from places like Russia and Iran and China. And you are not seeing this administration actually double down on the things that are uniquely American.
David, you know, what Skye was talking about, the judges kind of getting savvy to what the administration has done. They also seem to be getting irritated, right? And frustrated. And I've never been in front of no judge, but I do imagine watching The Good Wife and Scandal and stuff, when you piss them off, they will come back at you. So I guess my question, I think a lot of people have this question, what's the recourse that judges have when the administration continues to either piss them off or defy their orders?
Look, we have seen an escalation even at the Supreme Court level. It's kind of unprecedented for the Supreme Court to act so quickly to stop Alien Enemies Act expulsions from the United States. So we can see an escalation in what they're ordering the Trump administration to do, taking away the powers that the administration is claiming, and ultimately they can hold them in contempt. Now, this is something that the House of Representatives is upset about. They want to change the law and effectively prevent judges from being able to hold this administration in contempt, which would jeopardize all of our rights in the United States, because this is the ultimate power that judges have to hold someone in criminal contempt for violating their orders.
But in the immediate near term, what about these men and women who the U.S. government judges have said they are unlawfully detained and taken out of the country, bring them back? Yep. When are they going to be brought back?
Right.
Well, I do think you see the judges escalating the tools that they have. You see the judges over the last week asking the government really hard questions, bringing them in, saying you have to explain what you're doing. What are you doing to give people process, to give them access to the lawyers? And so I do think that you're going to see, like you said, the judges and the courts do have power. They do have power now to enforce their orders, and you're seeing that. You're already seeing questions of contempt in a number of cases.
But I wrote down the word defiance because that's all we have seen from the president and his administration. The courts say, do this. I don't care the language they use. Facilitate. Go to the thesaurus. It's a bring the man home. And they've done nothing, whether it's an order from the Supreme Court or a federal judge or a district judge. And so at what point, what can be done when the Trump administration flat out ignores a very clear ruling from the Supreme Court? Because I have no confidence that the Trump administration, the president, will listen to the Supreme Court despite what the president has said he would do.
Right. And instead, bring the leader of that country into the Oval Office.
Right.
They both saying, I'm not sending him back and I'm not asking for him.
Right. Well, I'll just say, I think that this is a place where the president and the administration is pushing way too far. First of all, you have contempt proceedings that are going to happen. I mean, these judges have said. And so the American people are going to see that on display. But poll after poll, and the most recent one says over 80% of the American people, including many of the people who are in the president's base, believe that people in this country should follow court orders and that the president should follow court orders. And so there is going to be political accountability. The people ultimately, I do think, are going to have to hold this administration accountable and the allies in Congress who seem to want to be able to pull the rug out from under the American people and render the courts, which are the actual institutions that protect our rights, to try to render them meaningless.
But they don't have armies. I guess I'm just like, how do they force it? You put contempt on the DOJ lawyers, and then
there are professional disciplinary proceedings. And by the way, you're going to see a similar cast of characters in this Massachusetts case that you talked about from Friday. There's a similar lawyer, the same lawyer that's also in Judge Boasberg's case here in Washington. So I think that there is professional responsibility consequences. There is civil contempt that can lead to fines and imprisonment that cannot be pardoned. And then there are criminal contempt proceedings. And I think, unfortunately, this administration is getting so close to the fire, you're going to start seeing those things play out.
Okay, this week, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem failed a pretty basic American civics test.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
This comes as a top defense official pushed analysts to rewrite an intelligence assessment on the relationship between the Venezuelan government and one of the most violent Venezuelan gangs, so it could, quote, not be used against Donald Trump. David Beer and Skye Perryman are back with us.
That was a beatdown. That was a senatorial beatdown. David.
Just reciting the Constitution is now a beatdown. Really unprecedented situation that we're dealing with here. Look, if you look at what she said, she says she focuses on the power of the president to suspend habeas corpus. Basically, she's redefining the right as the suspension, which would please the president to no end. And of course, they're looking into suspending this core fundamental right that Americans have to challenge their detention. When you challenge your detention through habeas, you are asking the government, give me the legal citation. What is the law under which I am being detained? And that's what they don't want to have to give. And so, yes, they're looking to suspend it. It's totally unconstitutional. Congress has the power to suspend habeas corpus, but only during an invasion of our country, which, of course, they say is immigration. Right. It's ludicrous. Every court that's looked at this says immigration is not an invasion. James Madison said immigration is not an invasion of the United States. It requires a military act to have an invasion.
Skye, do you believe that she doesn't know what habeas corpus is? Or, like David is suggesting, there's a longer plan here, right? Because we had Stephen Miller kind of floated out recently where he said, we're thinking about looking at it, right? The president hasn't said anything about it, but now you have her in front of Congress kind of redefining what it means. Is there something larger at work here, or is something wrong with education?
I think two things can be true at the same time here. I mean, first of all, when I watched that clip, it's just like this explains what we've been dealing with over the past 100 or so days with an administration. Exactly. I mean, right. With an administration that, again, is inconvenienced by the Constitution. The fact that the American people have rights, that people that are here have rights, is just not something that was in their plans. And so you definitely see that. But I do think that we're at a real crisis point where you have an administration that does not want to be beholden to our Constitution or the rule of law. They're seeking to normalize suggestions Well, maybe we don't have due process. Maybe certain people aren't entitled to due process. Well, that's not how due process works. It's for all of us.
Maybe it takes
right?
too long.
Right. Maybe it takes too long. Maybe we, need to just start asking and demanding that people show them their documents. American citizens walking around the streets. All of this is part of a normalization of things that are not normal in a democracy. And I think that we have to be vigilant about that.
Both of you have worked on immigration policy for years now and have dedicated your careers to it. Can you talk about what is different this second Trump administration versus Trump 1?
Look, in Trump 1, there was a lot of bad policy coming out. But even under the Muslim ban, I thought it was abhorrent. It was constitutionally questionable. Ultimately, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was fine. But in the interim, they were following court orders. So there was a refugee who came here from Iraq. They illegally deported him in violation of a court order. They brought him back.
Oh, they know how to bring people back.
They do know how to people.
Interesting.
Yes,
okay.
They do know how to do this. And ultimately, this time around, they just said, no, we're just not going to cooperate with the fundamental process of our Constitution.
Defiance.
And they just keep coming back to this point. I'll say this again, that Stephen Miller will go on Fox News and he'll say, they elected us to do this. And that does not matter under our Constitution. Elections do not change laws. They do not change our Constitution. So every single person who voted for him could have voted for him in order to do this, which is certainly not the case. I know many Trump voters who do not support this. Right. But even if it was the case, it didn't change our Constitution. It did not amend habeas corpus out of the Constitution when Americans voted in November. If you want to do that, you got to change the Constitution through the proper procedure.
But Americans didn't vote for this. And I think that's the place where the president here is flying too close to the sun. I mean, you have the vast majority of people, again, over 80%, expect compliance with court orders. People have concerns about immigration policy in this country, and Congress has not passed comprehensive immigration reform, which everyone agrees. But this isn't about immigration policy. We have people that are being sent as a mistake, oopsie, I mean, and not being returned. We have American citizens who are being detained without process. And so I think that this is far beyond what anybody, I think, voted for. And I think that the president and his associates are going to start being held accountable by the people. And you see that happening in communities across the country, town halls, where members of Congress of the president's party aren't even showing up to answer questions from their very base because people are so concerned about what's happening.
And I think the unpopularity of this goes to the fact that they have to lie about what they're doing so often. They say it's all about public safety, that everyone they've deported is a gang member and a criminal, even though we know the vast majority of the people who are sent to El Salvador have no criminal convictions in any country. And again, when you have to lie, that shows that they understand that this isn't actually popular with the American people, deporting legal residents of this country to foreign prisons. It just doesn't make sense to most people.
These two blocks have been fire. Thank you very, very much. David Beard, Skye Perryman, thank you both.